Kobayashi is a programmer who lived a quiet and boring life until that night when she left the bar, and it turned into a scene straight out of the Hangover movie. She ended up in a forest where she rescued an injured dragon, started talking to her, and since the dragon had nowhere to stay, Kobayashi told her she could live in her house. And well, the dragon she had saved was her. So to repay the favor, she accepted her offer and introduced herself as Tohru. She said that from now on she would move in with her and, to not be a burden, she would be her maid. But Kobayashi said she didn't have money to pay her, and that didn't matter to her. She just wanted to cook, iron, serve, and probably do more things because, yes folks, this dragon swung the other way and saw our girl like Shrek's donkey. Despite her good intentions, Kobayashi refused, and the waifu got very sad. But just when she was about to leave, the protagonist felt bad and, at the same time, saw the time and realized she was going to be late for work. So she asked if Tohru could fly her to work, and of course, she said yes. She got there in the blink of an eye, and seeing how helpful she was and having nowhere else to go, she changed her mind and let her stay. When she returned from work, Kobayashi started testing her to see how much she knew about being a maid. Well, the truth is, she was terrible at everything she did. When it was time to clean the house, she incinerated everything. At least she left it clean. When she washed the clothes, she put them in her mouth and said her saliva was better than any detergent and could clean stains easily. To top it off, she ended up cooking her own tail to feed her, and since the waifu didn't want it, she ended up eating it herself and it grew back. The truth is, Kobayashi realized she wasn't good at being a maid and had a lot to learn. So she assigned her a new task, which was to protect the house. Being a dragon, it was like having a fortress guard while she was at work since thieves were getting crazy in that area. If anything weird happened, she could call her on the phone and then leave. Speaking of thieves, just as she left the house, two thieves tried to break in. But when they opened the door, they found Tohru transformed and almost soiled their pants. At least she was good at protecting the house. On the other hand, when Kobayashi left work, her buddy Makoto invited her for some beers. Just as they were leaving the building, they ran into Tohru. She didn't like Makoto because she thought he was flirting with her waifu and wanted to take her away. So, after going with them uninvited and with Kobayashi completely wasted, the waifu transformed into a dragon in front of Makoto to take her home and let him know once again that she didn't like him, although deep down, she knew they were just friends. The next day, Kobayashi gave her an outfit as a thank you for taking her to work and protecting her house. This made her very happy, and she tried it on in front of her. That's when Kobayashi realized she had some serious assets and needed to buy her bigger clothes. But well, that same day while the waifu was working, Tohru started doing the laundry, and since it was cloudy, she had the bright idea of transforming into a dragon and using her magic to clear the clouds, leaving everyone in the city with their mouths open. Thanks to that, a very strange waifu said she had finally found her. Who is she? We'll find out later. At night, Kobayashi came home and told her she shouldn't use her powers that way, or it could get her into trouble. And well, while they were sleeping, Tohru had a nightmare where we saw how she was hurt by some knights, but being with Kobayashi didn't matter much anymore, and she knew her life was much better now. Next day, we see Tohru losing her patience while cooking because the stove is too slow. She decides to cook everything with her fire breath, but she only manages to burn the entire kitchen. Thanks to this, they have to go buy more food. On the way, Kobayashi wonders if Tohru will ever really adapt to living with her, given that she constantly causes chaos in the house. When they arrive at the mall, the waifu says she doesn't want to enter one of the stores because it has a medieval style and reminds her of a fight she had with humans a long time ago. Yes, folks, this waifu was probably older than an elf. But anyway, they decide to buy the fish first, and that's when Kobayashi realizes that Tohru is more social than she is, even knowing several people where she shops. So while they're there, nice and chill doing their shopping, a thief appears and steals a lady's purse. The waifu asks Kobayashi if she should stop him, and she says yes, but not to transform into a dragon to avoid drawing attention. Tohru takes off at great speed, catches the thief, and knocks him out with one blow. Everyone, upon seeing what she had done, stands amazed, staring at her, and the waifu gets very nervous. But luckily, all they do is congratulate her for what she did. Even so, Kobayashi takes her away from that place before they attract more attention. And meanwhile, we see that the same suspicious dwarf was spying on them from afar. When they get home, Kobayashi remembers she forgot to buy some things, so Tohru goes out again. At that moment, there's a knock on the door, and Kobayashi receives a visit from the dwarf. Her name is Kanna, and she is also a dragon transformed into a human. When she enters the house, she goes straight to the point and tells Kobayashi that she must break up with Tohru because she thought she had kidnapped her or something like that. But just at that moment, the waifu arrives and explains everything. However, Kanna was very sad because Tohru left her alone and didn't say anything. Plus, she had nowhere to go, and they kicked her out of her world for bothering the other dragons. Yes, folks, there were two worlds, and in the human world, dragons couldn't use magic easily, so she was practically out of energy and couldn't return because of that. So, Kobayashi has no choice but to let her stay with them, and the waifu is so moved that she starts crying. Later, we realize that Kana is like a little cell phone as she recharges her energy by plugging into an outlet, and then she's as good as new. So much so that she asks the girls to go somewhere else to play. After all, she was still a child, so they end up indulging her. And well, when they're playing, it looks like they're about to beat each other up, but they tell Kobayashi that this is their way of having fun. So she leaves them alone and goes to take a nap. But before that, she thinks that dragons could destroy her world if they wanted to, but seeing them behave like little girls, she feels more at ease. The next day, Kobayashi goes to work, and Tohru takes the opportunity to give the dwarf a tour of the city and teach her a bit about human customs. She takes her to eat, play in a park, tells her how she came to this world, and even uses an invisibility spell to transform into dragons and visit Kobayashi at work. After all, the dwarf grew fond of her too. Although, well, that spell seemed to only work on other humans because Kobayashi managed to see them through the window and got quite a scare. As days go by, Kobayashi realizes that she needs a bigger apartment to live with them, so she decides to start looking for a new place. After seeing a few, she settles on one with a huge terrace, just in case they need to transform. Once they arrive at their new apartment, they begin unpacking their things, and during this time, Tohru tells her that she always had trouble finding a home because her body was so large, and she constantly had to move from cave to forest. Moreover, if she stayed in one place too long, humans would start bothering her and try to harm her. At the same time, she notices Kobayashi washing some things and recalls that it was also difficult for her to keep clean. She used to clean herself with her own tongue, or sometimes even among other dragons. Hearing this, Kobayashi told her not to do that when transformed into humans. As they continue unpacking, they find a maid dress in one of the boxes that Kobayashi had bought a long time ago for an event or something, but she never used it. The waifu asks for permission to try it on, but when she puts it on, she says it's too tight in the chest area because of her big chest, and Kobayashi feels jealous because she's flat-chested. Anyway, when they finish unpacking, the waifus are very happy when Kobayashi gives them their own room. That same night, while Kobayashi is taking a bath, Tohru takes the opportunity to flirt with her and wash her back. She confesses that the only thing she likes about her human form is that she can be close to Kobayashi, but she's not very used to it. She also wants to take a bath herself, so the next day, to return the favor, she asks Kobayashi to transform her and takes her to the rooftop to give her a bath. It looked like she was washing an airplane, folks. Later, the waifu finishes work and goes to have some beers as usual, so the next day she wakes up with a hangover, and unfortunately, the neighbors start making a lot of noise. Kobayashi asks Tohru to politely ask them to lower the volume. Surprisingly, the waifu agrees and goes to each neighbor's house to ask why they were making so much noise and to please be considerate because her friend needed to rest. In the end, they reached an agreement and set schedules to avoid problems, as living in complete silence wasn't ideal for Kobayashi either. A few days later, the protagonist is invited to a party at work, but since she doesn't want to go, she decides to invite Makoto for a chill gathering at her new place. Tohru, on her part, also invites two of her dragon friends, Fafnir and Lukoa. They introduce themselves to everyone, and the guys start playing video games while the girls chat and prepare some food. Kobayashi, in turn, says that she's also happy to have Tohru in her life but doesn't want to say anything to avoid getting her too excited. In the end, they all eat, drink some beers, hang out, and have a great time all night. The next day, while the waifus are having breakfast, the protagonist notices that Kana keeps looking out the window at the other kids. So, she asks Tohru what she thinks might be going on, and Tohru says that Kana probably wants to be with the other children. After all, she is a child too. Then, Koba asks her if she wants to go to school, and Kana gets so happy that she answers for herself. Later, they go out to buy all the necessary school supplies, and the list is pretty long. Luckily, the little one only likes the cutest things, so it was easy to buy everything. After this, they head to the mall to buy a backpack. As I mentioned earlier, Tohru doesn't like the mall because it brings back bad memories, but when the protagonist told her they were going without her, she had no choice but to join them. Once they bought the backpack, we see that the little one falls in love with a keychain, but when she sees how much the protagonist spent on her school supplies, she decides not to say anything. The next day, Kana has to go to her first day of school, and Koba, before going to work, tells Tohru to keep an eye on her so she doesn't cause any trouble. When she introduces herself to the other kids in the classroom, everyone likes her because she's so cute. She even makes friends very quickly in gym class, which makes a girl named Riko a bit jealous. This loli actually didn't hate Kana or anything. On the contrary, she found her adorable, but she wanted to challenge her to a duel to see who was better. Yes, folks, she's the typical kid who thinks she's better than everyone else. But anyway, in the end, Kana starts crying and says she just wants to be friends. So, to avoid any trouble, Riko leaves her alone and they become friends. After school, Tohru waits for her at the exit and they go home together. There, she asks Kana why she wanted to go to school, and she says it seemed fun to hang out with other kids her age. When they get home, Koba is waiting for her with the keychain she liked. The waifu realizes that Koba knew she didn't want to say anything, but ended up buying it for her anyway. The next day, the waifu returns from school with Riko, looking a bit scared. Turns out that on their way, they passed through a park and almost got hit by a ball from some kids playing dodgeball. One of the kids apologizes, but since Riko thinks she's better than everyone else, she provokes them and ends up challenging them to a dodgeball duel. Because of this, they arrive home really scared and tell everyone that they need reinforcements to play against them. Unfortunately for those poor kids, Tohru, the emo, and Lukoa agree to help them. So you can imagine what happened to those poor boys. The game didn't even last 2 seconds, and since they wanted to keep having fun, they started playing among themselves with their supernatural strength, so the park ended up a mess, and the protagonist was worried because several people saw what they did. But Lukoa told her to relax because she could erase everyone's memories with her magic. The next day at work, a waifu tells the protagonist that she has noticed she's been much happier and kinder than she used to be. This makes the protagonist reflect because it's been exactly 2 months since she started living with the girls, and she does feel better. She can't even remember how she used to behave before meeting them. Meanwhile, we see Tohru turn on the TV to continue learning about human customs. After finishing all her chores, she decides to use her invisibility magic to go to the protagonist's workplace. When she gets there, we see that this time the spell works perfectly. She's completely unnoticed in Koba's office, where everyone gets along and supports each other at work. Well, everyone except the supervisor. This bald guy loves to mess with everyone, especially Koba. Despite her hard work, he starts scolding her in front of everyone for being late with an unimportant task. So, to get back at him, Tohru makes him trip, and the old man gets even more furious for making a fool of himself. Later, Koba continues helping her friends with various programming tips. Just when they think everything is going well, the annoying bald guy returns to scold her again for no reason. That's when Tohru gets angry and makes him trip over and over. As night falls, the waifu leaves work, and for some reason, she feels Tohru's presence and calls her name. Tohru then lifts the spell, giving her a big scare since she had suspected Tohru was with her but wasn't sure. The waifu doesn't mind Tohru helping her and remembers what her coworker said in the morning, that she's much happier since being with Tohru. As for the supervisor, he ended up getting fired for abusing his power over the other employees. The next day, we see Tohru talking with the emo, who tells her that he plans to stay and live in the human world just like her. This worries Tohru a bit because she knows her friend doesn't get along well with humans, and he didn't have a place to stay. But the guy tells her not to worry because he could go live in the mountains, and indeed that didn't go well since everyone saw him transformed, and it even made the news. Because of this, Tohru helps him find a place to live. While they're on their way, the emo asks her what she will do when years pass and the humans they grow attached to die. She tells him she doesn't want to think about that and just wants to enjoy the beautiful moments with them while she can. Besides, she doesn't plan on returning to the dragon world. Well, after this somewhat sad conversation, the guy tries to rent an apartment, but when it's time to pay, the only thing he has is a gold piece. So, they kick him out because it's not a pawn shop. Speaking of homes, he remembers that he gets along well with Makoto, so he takes him to Makoto's house and asks if he can stay there for a while. Since they're both game-obsessed geeks, Makoto says yes, and they start playing together. After the protagonist taught the girls some magic tricks and they had a great time, we see that Riko was starting to have feelings for Kanna. So, she invites Kanna to her house to play and tells her she can bring her maid since she also has one, and they could all hang out together. The next day, they all end up at Riko's place. We see that Koba joined them too, but Tohru wasn't too happy about sharing with another maid. That's when we meet Jordy, Riko's maid and older sister. This waifu took on the maid role because she really liked that sort of thing, and guess what? So did our protagonist. That's why she kept the maid outfit she lent to Tohru the other day. They got along very well, so the three of them went off to talk about maid stuff, even though Tohru was practically dragged along. Meanwhile, the Lolis, now alone, went to Riko's room to play Twister. Since Riko had a crush on Kanna, her hormones went wild being so close to her, and it seemed like the dragon liked it too because just when she was about to do something, Tohru barged in asking for help since the other pair wouldn't stop talking about maid stuff. The next day, the girls meet up with Lukoa, who tells them she has also decided to stay and live in the human world, and that she already found someone to stay with, just like them. It turns out that one night on her way home, she came across someone performing a ritual to summon a demon. To prevent this from happening, she decided to appear in its place. That's when she realized the person performing the ritual was a young boy named Shoyuta, who belongs to a family of mages. The waifu invites the girls to Shuta's house to help clear up the misunderstanding, since he thinks she's a demon and not a dragon. So, the girls end up accompanying her. When they arrive, Koba asks what she really is, and Lukoa explains that she's a different kind of dragon, considered a sort of goddess. But after getting drunk and misbehaving, she lost her title and was practically exiled. In the middle of the conversation, Shoyuta arrives, and we see that he's very shy. And who wouldn't be, with Lukoa constantly pressing her tremendous attributes against him. She did this to make him feel comfortable, but it really only made things worse. Lukoa tells him she brought her friends to help convince him that she's not a demon and all that, but the kid doesn't believe her. Tohru then asks why he wanted to summon a demon. He says he just wanted to be accepted as a real mage, as they have to hide their powers to avoid attention. His father is also one of them, and it turns out they both belong to the dragon world too. How they ended up there, we don't know yet, but I'm sure we'll find out later. At the same time, Tohru tells him that to stay in his house, he has to offer something in return, like how she is Koba's maid. Lukoa starts giving him various ideas of things he could do, but the boy rejects all of them until she suggests something quite indecent, which only makes him run away in fear. On their way home, Koba tells Tohru she felt a bad vibe in that house, and that Shuta's father is the boss at her company. Coincidence? I think not. Meanwhile, we see that the emo and Makoto are getting along very well, so much so that he put on some strange clothes to participate in an otaku event with his friend. Despite hating humans, he feels good being with Makoto, and thanks to this, his evil side is disappearing, and he's becoming a true geek like his buddy. As the days go by, the waifus decide to go to the beach, and little Shoyuta tags along as well. As I mentioned before, his father is his new boss, and he asked him to do it. As for Lukoa, well, it was really hard for the little guy to be around her with the swimsuit she was wearing. She was practically showing everything, and the poor guy was completely intimidated. So much so that one of the lifeguards had to cover her with a towel to prevent the beach from becoming rated +18. Well, eventually she slipped away and went back to her friends. Meanwhile, the girls applied sunscreen and started having fun, playing watermelon smash, and swimming in a way that worried Koba a bit. After that, the waifu saw an ice cream stand that brought back good memories of her father taking her to the beach while she was sharing with Tohru. Tohru also had memories of her father, but they were very different from hers. Her father only forced her to deal with humans, and that wasn't very pleasant. To forget about it, she asks the waifu to continue telling her about her family. The waifu says she had a pretty normal life, lived with her parents until she started college, and as soon as she finished, she became independent and started living alone. Since then, she only calls them to check on them and visits them from time to time. Hearing this, the waifu gets a bit sad, and as the protagonist notices, she tells her that she wants to ride her, and her face completely changes. After transforming and taking everyone out into the middle of the sea, Koba starts fishing while the others play. At that moment, he takes the opportunity to ask if she misses her old world, and she says no. Also, while talking about parents, he asks about hers, and Tohru says she would like to introduce them someday. But she could never do that because they would devour her just by seeing her, as they didn't tolerate humans. They even saw her as strange for interacting with them, and that was one of the reasons she felt sad during their conversation. Anyway, after returning from the trip, Makoto invites them to Comiket to help him sell his manga and stuff. While they're there, Tohru encounters 3 guys from her world using their true forms. They wanted to take advantage of the bug to avoid being in human form, and other people thought it was just cosplay or something. At the same time, they ask her to transform too, but when the waifu tells them she can't because she's a dragon, the guys run away scared. After all, dragons had a bad reputation in their world. However, after talking with them, she asked Koba if she could show part of her transformation to feel like herself for a moment, and the waifu agrees. So, she reveals her wings and tail, which catches the attention of the geeks, and she becomes the most popular for a while, to the point that people start asking for photos, and she has a great time. On the other hand, the sports festival at Kanna's school is approaching, but since she had no clue what it was, she asked Riko. Riko explained that it was an event where she could have fun and compete against other students, and while doing so, her parents and friends would be cheering her on, so she knew she would have a great time. When she got home, the little one was super motivated and asked Koba to accompany her to the festival. However, this time the protagonist couldn't help her out because she had too much work, so the little one ended up feeling very sad. Tohru told her she could go in her place so she wouldn't feel bad. However, the little one replied that all her friends would be there with their parents, and she saw Tohru as an older sister and Koba as a mother. Hearing this, the protagonist felt a bit guilty and apologized for not being able to attend, so the waifu locked herself in her room feeling very down. At that moment, Tohru revealed that Kanna's parents had abandoned her, believing that it would make her stronger. That's why she wanted to experience the affection she had never had. The next day, when the waifu returned from school, she asked her sister to use the invisibility spell and went to see our protagonist at work. When she came back exhausted that night, the little one, knowing how hard she was working, said it didn't matter if she couldn't come to the festival to support her. After all, she understood she was busy with work. Because of this, the waifu was deeply moved and started doing extra hours at her job to attend the little one's event. Even her buddy Makoto, seeing her working so hard, decided to help her out. Thanks to that, when the festival day arrived, Koba told her she could accompany her, and the little one was thrilled. At the festival, we see the little ones having fun, and Shoyuta won several of the competitions thanks to Lukoa. With her amazing attributes, she distracted all the kids and took advantage of the bug to win. On the other hand, Kana and her team, without a cheerleader to distract the other kids, had to work really hard and ended up in second place in several events. When the final race came to decide the winner, Riko was too tired and left her team at a disadvantage. But still, the little one didn't give up. When it was her turn, she pulled off an amazing battle pass, caught up with all the kids, and ended up winning the festival with her team. Later, the girls congratulated them on the medal they won, and at that moment, Koba thanked them for attending the event and sharing that lovely moment with her little one. Days pass and Christmas arrives. We see Tohru out with the little one, buying a few things. While they're out, they run into the vendor who treated them so well the last time they visited. It turns out the old man injured his leg practicing for a Christmas show that's a tradition in his community. He asks for their help to fill in for him so he doesn't let everyone down, and the waifu agrees. Later, Tohru gathers all her friends and tells them about the mess she's gotten into because of the old man, so she asks for their help. To top it all off, they didn't even know what they were supposed to do in the show. Each one starts suggesting ideas, but the one that grabs everyone's attention is Riko's idea, a play about the little match girl, a famous story during this time of year. Everyone thinks it's a good idea, so they start looking for the protagonist for the play. Thanks to Lukoa, they end up dressing Shoyuta as a girl, which makes the poor little guy so embarrassed that he hides under the table and refuses to accept the role. So they end up choosing Kana as the lead role. So cute, she looks like Little Red Riding Hood. The waifu gets so excited about the whole thing that she stays completely immersed in her role. The next day, the kids start rehearsing, and during the break, they realize the play needs something more to make it exciting. So they decide to make a few changes. The day of the play arrives, and our protagonist and Makoto leave work early to catch the performance. That's when they realize they've messed up the whole play, altering it completely. The original story was about a girl who died of cold and went to heaven with her grandmother, but they ended up turning it into a magical fairy tale with samurais and monsters everywhere, kind of like the 47 Ronin. But anyway, what's important is that the audience, especially the old folks, loved it, and how could they not, considering they spent the whole play staring at Lukoa's attributes. Afterward, the kids celebrate with a Christmas party at Koba's house. Later, when the protagonist wakes up, Tohru tells her she's had too much to drink as usual, and that her braces came off in the middle of the party. When this happened, the others decided to head home to celebrate on their own. That same night, the protagonist wanted to take advantage of the Christmas spirit and asked Tohru to transform into a dragon to go for a walk. During this time, she gives Tohru a gift, and when Tohru sees it's something from another world, she doesn't seem too pleased, though she appreciates the gesture. At the same time, she gives the protagonist a scarf. When they return home, the protagonist waits for Kana to fall asleep to leave her a gift, but accidentally makes some noise and wakes her up, so she has to wait a bit longer for her to fall back asleep to leave the gift and make her think Santa Claus left it. A few days later, the waifus participate in a commercial raffle. The lucky Tohru had managed to get 3 tickets with the hope of winning a trip to the hot springs, but all she ends up winning is a kotatsu, you know, one of those warm blankets you put on the table during cold days. On the other hand, while they're at work, Makoto asks what she'll do in the winter, and the waifu says she plans to stay home with the girls. As for him, he can visit her after he goes to Kamiket. During those free days, the waifus spend their time sitting under the kotatsu, talking, resting, and sharing, and not just among themselves, because one day the neighbors drop by to give them New Year's gifts, so the girls also give them some mochi they had prepared. Days go by, and New Year's Eve arrives. Here, Kana asks the protagonist to help her put on her kimono to meet her friend at the temple. Yes, folks, this is the typical episode where they go to enjoy the festival. Later, the girls gather with all their buddies to celebrate New Year's Eve. We see that everyone wore kimonos. Well, everyone except the protagonist and Makoto. Apparently, they couldn't care less, so once they're there, they buy several things. Makoto tells the protagonist how things went at Comic-Con. Alma gets some fortune slips, they share and have a good time. Later, the girls invite everyone to their house to finish celebrating New Year's. While the little ones are asleep, the others take the opportunity to enjoy the food prepared by Tohru. The next day, they watch the sunrise from the building's rooftop, then spend boring days eating mandarins, watching TV, and helping Kana with her calligraphy homework. In the midst of this, the protagonist receives a call from her mother to thank her for the New Year's card she sent. When she returns from talking to her, Tohru asks who called, and when she says, Tohru seems a bit sad, as it appears she missed her family even though she didn't always show it. Speaking of family, when they're alone, the waifu asks Koba why she doesn't visit her parents during the holidays, and she says she prefers to stay and rest. When she asks the same question to the waifu, we see she has a memory that doesn't seem to please her much, so she says her life was with her, and she didn't want to go anywhere else. And well, the next day the holidays end, and the protagonist has to return to work, but just before she leaves, she gives the girls some New Year's gifts. The next day, Tohru asks the protagonist what she wants to eat, and since she can't decide, she tells Tohru to choose for her. Tohru says that when she gets back from work, she'll make something delicious. After this, the girls head out and Tohru is left alone in the apartment. She starts doing the house chores, receives an order, and begins preparing the food. Although it looked great when she tasted it, she felt something was missing to make it taste better. At that moment, Lukoa visits her, and while they eat some desserts, Lukoa suggests buying better ingredients if she wants her food to have a different flavor. So, Tohru heads to the city to buy some things, but when she sees that the good ingredients are more expensive and out of her budget, she tries to negotiate with the vendor, but it doesn't go well. So, she goes to another world to find the necessary items, and when Kana comes back from school, she shows her all the ingredients she gathered and asks her to help with cooking. On the other hand, Koba is back home thinking about the delicious meal waiting for her, but since she's really tired, she falls asleep for a moment. She begins to dream about the day she met Tohru. After work and a few drinks too many, she missed several train stations and ended up in the forest where Tohru found her. At first, Tohru was aggressive, but after Koba helped her remove the sword that was hurting her, she became kinder. Tohru explains that humans had hurt her, which made her distrustful of them, but she was also going through a tough time at work. They started to vent to each other about how unfair life was, and well, they both ended up pretty drunk. Koba asks if she has a place to return to, and when she says no, she invites her to live with her, which makes Tohru cry with joy and accept. At that moment, she wakes up just at her station and arrives home, where the waifus are waiting with a good amount of food. Despite being from another world, she actually likes it this time. After this, they put away the leftovers in the fridge and settle in to watch TV. The protagonist asks if she had any human friends in the other world, and she says that while she was flying around changing homes, she met a girl in a ruined village. This waifu was a bandit, and since they were both alone, they started talking. She advised her to stay in one place for a while so humans wouldn't attack her. Speaking of attacks, she had robbed a caravan, and that didn't end well. Then the protagonist asks what she would do if she weren't a fugitive, and she says she'd like to be a maid. Luckily, her dream came true when she continued her journey and arrived at the next village, and that's how she started to like the idea of becoming a maid. After the story, we see that, on the other hand, Elma was eating peacefully when suddenly a portal appears in the sky showing the face of another dragon, and this one didn't look very friendly. While the dragons snuck into their world and flew through the sky, the girls enjoyed a peaceful breakfast, completely unaware that things were about to change. Later, the girls went their separate ways for their daily routines, and we see Riko confessing her feelings to Kanna, giving her a flower that was very important to her. On the other hand, while Tohru was out shopping, she started having hallucinations about her life 100 years in the future. Since her waifu would probably be with the gods, she would be left alone because dragons could live for thousands of years peacefully. Well, it turns out the culprit behind these hallucinations was her father. Yes, folks, this old guy, Damocles, was the dragon that had snuck into their world and was lurking around. So he takes on his human form and tells his daughter that she must return to their world. Not only does he tell her, but he also forcibly takes her away. Fortunately, Kana was nearby and witnessed everything, so she goes back home and tells Koba what happened. Koba nearly has a heart attack upon hearing this bad news because, given the way the old man took her, there was a real possibility of never seeing her again. Meanwhile, their friends feel her aura disappear from their world, but unfortunately can't do anything about it. Days pass, and the girls find their daily routine disrupted. They had become so accustomed to Tohru doing everything for them that they had turned into a bunch of useless individuals who couldn't live without her. Everyone missed her. The waifu couldn't focus on work, and even when Makoto invited her out for drinks after work, she declined. Kana, on the other hand, spent more time with Riko to avoid feeling so lonely, while Lukoa and the emo also wanted to see her. One night, after the protagonist comes home from working extra hours, has dinner, and falls asleep on the couch, the next morning she hears knocks on her door. When she opens it, it's Tohru transformed into a dragon. They greet each other cheerfully, and Tohru apologizes for leaving without saying goodbye but is now back to stay. However, just at that moment, a portal opens and her father appears again, very angry because she had escaped again. He tells her in front of Koba that she cannot live in the human world, as if other dragons find out what she's been doing, they might invade the world, and she would be responsible for the chaos. But she tells him that she belongs in that world, that she loves Koba, and all that stuff. However, he reminds her that she is not human, and at any moment her dream could end, and she would end up regretting it. At this point, the protagonist tries to say something, and the old man tells her to shut up, even breaking her glasses, and tells her to think carefully about what she's going to say, or else he'll send her to St. Peter. The Despite the waifu being very scared, she stands her ground and tells him that Tohru doesn't want to return to her world and that she can't do anything to stop her because he knows he can't do whatever he wants in the human world. Because of this, the old man gets enraged and casts a spell, but Tohru stops him and they move to another location to fight. So both transform in the middle of nowhere and start throwing punches. However, the protagonist doesn't just stand by and arrives flying with Kana to stop the fight. At that moment, she goes full Naruto and evangelizes the old man, telling him to let Tohru stay, that it wasn't the right way to handle things and blah blah. Thanks to this, the old man's heart softens a bit and he leaves them in peace. Still, he wasn't okay with the two living together because he knew a human wouldn't live long enough to stay with his daughter, so he returns to his world. After this, everything returns to normal between the girls and their dragon friends. They get along better with their humans, and after a while, they decide to visit Koba's parents. Thus ends the first season of this anime.